Alrighty, so this tutorial is about making a stylized animating ocean like this. Um, just be forewarned, I am a game developer, so my VFX skills are kind of more geared towards that. So this is kind of just faking a lot of things. It's not actual collision with any of these like shorelines or anything. If you want to do that, then you probably have to do like some sort of simulation and get that into the mix. All right, so let's talk about how to set this up. Okay, so I'm also gonna include this file in the links down below, and yeah, so you can just dissect it yourself and go at your own speed and follow along. But essentially, what this is a plane, and if I just start hiding some of these things, let's go back into my little layout menu. And forgive me, I'm a Blender novice, but I wanted to make this tutorial for y'all. And first steps first, get your geometry in there. Get an island. I have an island that's kind of just under the surface of that water, and you can see that it extends pretty far below. You probably don't need to move it that far. And I just have some props on the surface here. And yeah, and then we have a singular plane that's making all that ocean, and then we also have an ocean depth. Okay, so so first I'd say get your geometry in there, then just do Shift A and make it a little cube in there and scale it up to be big like this. You see how big that scale is, right? You can even go bigger. And note that I have a few different settings on here, right? So if we click on the little material for this guy, and let's go to our shading, and let me also just do like a little bit more of a basic view. I don't want to be taking a bunch of processing power. So note that this depth is has nothing plugging into the surface shader there. Okay, has nothing, no input, so it has no surface on there. And I'm just using some volume for that. You could even use volume absorption and plug that in there as well, and fiddle around with the density there. That way you don't have as many parameters to mess around with. And let me switch over to Eevee real quick. So let me go to my little rendering tab, and I'm gonna go over to Eevee. Boom. And that's just gonna approximate like what the what that depth looks like. So we could plug in our volume there, and if you up that density to whatever, your Eevee density is going to be different from your cycles density, by the way. So if you're looking for just a little bit of depth, you know, don't take these settings to be what's going to show up when you render in cycles. It's a completely different engine. You know, Eevee is fantastic, but it's cheating a lot of things. So just get a cube in there with that material and just have it plugging up that volume. Without this, if I change that density to 0, boom, then you're gonna get like those edges. You're gonna see like the bottom of the island. This is basically faking the depth of the ocean. Okay, so get that in there and find a value that works for you. Next up, let's add another plane to this. Okay, so again, I'm just gonna hop back into a more basic view there, and in the source file you can definitely steal this and just check out the modifiers and stuff that I'm using on there. But I'm going to do Shift A, and I'm just going to make a plane. Boom, one singular plane there. Okay, now on that plane, this plane is going to be our actual ocean. This guy right here, that's gonna be our ocean. And let's go over to the our little modifiers and just add an ocean modifier to this. So under physics, you're looking for ocean. Bop. And you can change how much you want this to tile. You can change how dense the resolution of that is. And let's just, oh, sorry, there we go. Let's just up this a couple times, you know. So I'm gonna do 3 on this dimension, 3 on that dimension, and then we can just go and move this around, you know. And we just want to line that up on top of that little dense depth of that volume absorption there. Okay. Now this, if we go back to our modifiers and expand this, we can also give this, let's go to our material view, and again, it's just that depth that you're seeing right there. It might not render out like that. If you want, you can move that cube lower, and you can scale this stuff up. But if we press play, let's go give ourselves a little bit more room here. Let's just give ourselves 200 frames or so. This ocean modifier right here, see how I'm playing but nothing's happening? What you want to do is go to frame 1 or whatever frame you're starting from and key your little time value in here, okay? And then go to however long your scene is and up this amount to something else, and see how that surface is changing. So it's just a real nice fast way to get that surface to deform. And then once you like what you have, you can just go ahead and key, and then you can just play back that animation. Note though that it has a weird sort of slow in, slow out, right? So what you want to do is select these keys, and with those selected, I'm gonna right click, and then interpolation mode, we're just gonna make that linear. Boom. That way it's a even amount of animation there. It's not gonna be like slow moving waves and then fast moving in the middle and then slow again, right? It's gonna be just a nice even amount of deformation on that surface. Okay, so next up, you can change so many parameters on this. Like you can change the size of the actual the size of the actual ocean that's deforming there. If it's not detailed enough, you can up the amount of resolution as well. Note that your scene's gonna move slower when you do this though, okay? So be careful with that. Change the scale of the waves as well. I'm liking the scale of the waves kind of by default here. I feel like it's nice and kind of even. They're not like splashing over, you know, so I'm having a good time with that, you know. Next up, we want to have some foam, okay? Also, yeah, we should also, if you want it to have more kind of lateral movement to these waves, you can control the choppiness, and you can control the alignment if you want it to be like as if there was like a wind blowing, you know, across the surface. You can change how aligned those waves are, and yeah, so just fiddle around with all those settings till you get something that you want. But I'm liking these so far, and we probably want to have this a bit more centered, you know, so let's just grab these guys right there. Boom, there we go. So next up for the foam, boom, let's just you just add that little check mark and do some foam, and I'll call this like tut foam. There we go. And we're gonna plug it into our shader with that foam eventually, okay? And we can control how much it's gonna send to the shader. So let's get a new material on this bad boy, okay? This material, let's just add new. I'll call this one New Ocean. There we go. And we'll plug into some other things eventually, but just so you can get an idea of what it's gonna look like, we're gonna get less roughness in there and more of that like blue color in there as well. And then some quick settings on here. Blend mode, you want to do some alpha blend here. And if you're gonna have those shadows kind of cast from the things, then you might want to use one of these different settings in here as well. I don't necessarily need shadows for this. We're kind of cheating it with that depth plane that's below it. But yeah, so there we go. So some other setup before we dive into the actual material of the ocean itself is on your rendering camera, set a good end clip, like a one that's far away into the distance. Otherwise, it'll like chop off some of your waves by default, you know. And also, additionally, what we want to do is when we have our background here, you want to go to your world settings, and in that background, you want to plug in a color. I really recommend downloading an HDRI sky. You can literally just go to any site and you can just download HDRI sky, and they're a dime a dozen, you know. Like there's so many of them. So grab an environment that you like. I like the ones that have like the like no grass at the bottom, because that's going to introduce like some green into your rendering, you know, and won't quite make sense, you know. Like this is clearly like a lot of ocean water down there, you know. So yeah, so I'd recommend something like that, and that's how I'm lighting that background there, you know. So that's how I'm getting just a nice kind of dynamic light across the surface here to begin with. Yeah, so that's pretty much all the setup so far, and let's get into the actual material now. So if you look at my other material, let's go to my shading menu, and Blender's shader editor is fantastic, absolutely wonderful. I much prefer it over Maya's, but this is my shading network. Okay, this is like all these nodes, they're working together, and I want this tutorial to be kind of more about this part of it, because you can do so many things with these nodes. And if I just want to do a breakdown of this real quick, it all starts with our geometry position and our foam. Okay, so I'm taking that foam and that geometry position data, and I'm kind of combining them. So this one, I'm piping it into some noise. Now, if you aren't experienced with noise, I really recommend exploring it, because it's valuable for making a lot of effects and cheating a lot of things to make it look, you know, good and stylized and stuff. So I'm basically taking some noise and I'm combining that with the foam, and then I'm taking the distance of it, and I'm essentially using a sine wave to control the shape of each of those cascading waves that go towards the surface. Okay, and then I'm changing the profile of those sine waves to make them sharper and give it those clean peaks that I showed at the beginning. And then we are going to be using a little bit of displacement for that. Okay, so I'll break this down a little bit more, but I just wanted you to know that. And I've also labeled some of the parameters in here so that you can use like the amount of waves. You know, it's all just math on there. So let's walk through that. Okay, so let's go to our new material, and let's see right here. Let's grab this guy. Boom, new ocean. We have nothing. Okay, we have nothing. So press Shift A and just type in attribute. Boop, right there. And name, I'm going to grab, if you go over to your little ocean modifier here, tutorial foam. Okay, so I'm going to grab that and put that in there. Boom. And this, if we plug it in, whenever you're doing any sort of shader editing, I want you to know that you can plug in these values and test them. That's in fact how I just do most of my work when I'm doing this stuff. Is I'm just constantly, let's get a darker color on this. I'm just constantly testing parameters with this emission node. So see our foam right here. Oops, sorry. See our foam right here. That's that being generated by our ocean parameter here, and you can change how much and how dense you want it to be. It's a fantastic little tool there. It is not entirely physically accurate though. Okay, we're not going, like I said at the beginning, we're not going for physical accuracy. Okay, so if you want to double check it against the other one, you can see how I'm plugging it in here. This is essentially a cheap way of kind of blurring that noise. Okay, so I'm going to pipe the color into a noise texture, and then I'm going to subtract it with a little color mixer node, and then I'm going to plug that into another add. So I'm going to kind of add that blurry noise on top of itself. And this little roughness parameter gives a sort of scattering effect to it. Okay, so let's do the same thing here. Boom. I'm just going to put that into a noise texture. I'm going to put it into the vector right there. Let's up that roughness. So you can just see this by itself. If we plug it in, and then control this parameter, it's getting a little bit messed up in there. That's why we want to start inverting it. So I'm going to do that mix, and let's do, I suppose I could just invert it, you know, but if we just do subtract, where is it? Subtract, there we go. Subtract from that, and then plug that in. Let's see that. We're going to try to invert it with this sort of thing. Let's unplug that. There we go. And then, boom. So it's going to be a little bit more rough. You can see it's kind of hard to observe in there, but it's kind of scattering that foam shape a little bit right there with that noise. Okay, so there we go. And now we're going to take that and add it back to that original one. So I'm going to add, and we could do a mix here. I'm going to mix these two together, and then boom, let's do that. And there we go. So now we have that noise in there, right? And it's a little bit blurrier than before. I wish there was just like a nice clean blur node. There might be a Blender genius out there that knows. But this is a very important idea. So I'm going to take that result, and like I'm not seeing enough of that depth. Okay, so I want you to be aware of ramps, color ramp. Okay, if you go in here, it's going to take that result and it's going to plug that in. And this little gradient samples that that input, okay? Meaning that we can take this, let's let it do some thinking in there. It doesn't look any different, right? But if we start to clamp down on some of this, look at that. Look at that. And then if we clamp down this direction, now we're getting some chunky, sort of noisy values in there, right? And then if we press play, it's going to go a little bit slow, but look at that, you know? So it's already a little bit more stylized that way, you know? Already a bit more stylized. So that's great for us. Next up, let's add some noise to that, okay? Now again, if you want to look at my other one, boom, you'll see that I'm using geometry, right? A geometry input. And I'm taking that positional data, and I'm this is how I animate it eventually, but I'm going to plug that into a Voronoi texture, okay? Voronoi. Now, if you're not familiar with what Voronoi noise is, you can go in here and just look up like Voronoi noise, and it's this sort of cells pattern, right? And that cells pattern exists all over in nature. Like, think about this, like in like leaves, in like our skin cells themselves, you know, so like leather and stuff too, like it's just everywhere, right? So we want to plug in with a similar sort of algorithm in here. So let's go back to our shader. Bop. And I don't have any like UVs that I'm assigning to that plane, correct? So what we want to do is use that geometry node, right? So I'm going to press Shift A and then look for geometry. Now, since we don't have any UVs, we're essentially using the position of those of the world space coordinates, the position data, as our UVs. We're mapping it to the world position of that. Okay, so if we plug this into, there we go. If we plug that into Voronoi, and like I said, feel free to swap these out every time that you're doing it. Boom. you'll see exactly what it looks like. Okay, so that's way too dense, right? So I'm going to take down that scale in there, and look at all of like that crazy color detail we're getting there. So what we want to do is change this to whatever sort of setting you want. Like, this doesn't feel exactly right, you know, but this is starting to feel a little bit softer. This is, let's let that calculate. Okay, I guess that's just hanging out there. Oh shoot. Okay, yeah, it didn't even plug in. All right, so let's grab the distance there and then plug that into color. So now you have that like sort of like almost like a stained glass sort of effect in there, right? If I was to make a stained glass material, I'd definitely use Voronoi as well. And then let's change this to end sphere radius, and just so you can see what all of your noise options are. Okay, we're gonna use two types of noise in here. But yeah, so there we go. And you can see in my source one, I just want to double check so I'm not leading you guys astray. I'm just using the F1 type, and then keep your randomness high, you know. And I'm going to show you a little trick with our add. Okay, so let's go back to our thing right here, F1, Euclidean, and let's plug in distance there. So before, plugging in just the color was nice, but like this distance, you can see that sort of froth. Now, if you look at one of my favorite games ever, let's do Wind Waker Ocean. This is part of what's inspiring my shader here, this sort of pattern, right? Now, they just hand painted that and then applied it, right? But what we're gonna do is utilize this as that pattern, right? So if we take this sort of pattern in there, and we can change the scale of it and everything, you know. But if we combine that with our foam and then clamp it into that color ramp, it's going to get some really nice results. So the way that you mix these two noises together is by, let's plug that distance into a, let's just add that into a mix, you know, and then let's add that together. I'm just gonna up that factor so it gets all of them in there, and then let's plug that into that ramp and plug that into our outgoing color. And then we need to fiddle, see how it's like all filled up. Now we need to, grab these little excuse me, Blender. We need to grab these and then adjust that sort of fall off so it's not as powerful. We can change how much that, let's make this one the top, and then this distance, whoops, let's undo that. There we go. We're gonna make this distance the second one, and now we can control how much they're kind of influencing each other. So now we're kind of using that base foam, and then we use a Voronoi texture on there to sort of push it around and add a little bit more stylized noise to it. Now, if you look close, you can see that Voronoi peeking through. Like, just like blur your eyes and look at it, you can see that it's like more concentrated in there as well. So what we need is the Voronoi to also animate. So the way that we're going to do that is by changing some of our position data, okay? Because this is a 3D noise texture. That means that if I move this plane up on the Z-axis in Blender, if you're in Maya, this would be on like the Y-axis, and they have their own shader network for this sort of stuff. But it's the same sort of concept. So if we change our position data, right? And I don't mean like you're gonna physically animate the ocean up and down to change the noise. I suppose you could, but it'd be like a little bit weird that the whole plane is moving up and down. What if we just change the math of that position data? So if we take this and plug that into a vector math, so I'm just gonna type in math. I'm gonna add, And then let's plug this in. So nothing changed, but watch as I animate this. You see that right there? Ooh, that's the juice. You see that? It's adding to the X position data, right? So see how it's scanning across the position data, and I hope your minds are rippling at the thought of that, right? So something that we can do, and then this is of course Y or Z in Maya land, you know. Sorry, I come from Maya, so I'm going to be translating a lot of this into Maya. But yeah, so if we instead change the Z axis, the up and down in here, notice that that position data doesn't have like a directionality, but it has a nice different noise that just kind of continues on, okay? So the way that we can get this to animate is if you type #frame. So it's going to plug in the current frame that we're on into that field. So if I press spacebar, it's probably gonna go super fast. But yeah, look at that. It's animating that channel with our current frame, which is beautiful because then that means that we can do some math on that. Like it's moving too fast, right? So what if I, let's delete driver, boom. I'm just gonna do #frame times 0.1, right? So it's not as much. Now it's going to go much slower, but it's still animating that noise. Okay? So that's just beautiful right there. So being able to animate 3D noise is such a huge VFX tool just by itself. And now my ocean waves are getting sampled at that different rate. You can change the factor to see like how much you want to show through, you know. And there you go. So that's how you can get some stylized noise. You can change the scale of it so it's more like finely detailed or less finely detailed, more chunky. But that's just a huge, awesome tool right off the bat right there, okay? So I definitely recommend getting used to that and animating these parameters. If you don't like typing an equation in there, you can just simply, let's do Shift A and type in value. We're going to add a value. And on here, you can just do #frame. And then here, we're going to plug this into math. Oops, math. And then let's do, we're just looking for multiply. So math, multiply. And then in here, I can just control this with whatever. So I can just give it like a higher value there, and then I can plug that into, oh, sorry, I should probably do a vector math, and then let's get a, vector, or let's do a value, beep, right there. And we basically want only that Z channel being affected, right? So because if I plug this in currently to all of them, note that it's going to attach all of those together, and that can create some problems because it'll be moving it on all axes, that noise. But yeah, let's find. I think it's just like, what is it? XYZ combine or something? XYZ, yeah, combine XYZ. And we just want the Z channel only to be affected, and let's unplug that. And then you can plug this in there. So this is just a nice way to get around the, oh yeah, we don't necessarily need this. This is a nice way to get around like typing in, frame times whatever value. It's a little bit harder to visually see. So if you like this, then I'd recommend a setup like that. But there you go. So that's just the base noise, right? That's the base noise right there. Okay. And then I'd recommend, notice that I'm plugging into the emission. So this is kind of another hack because emission technically, emits light from it. But I find that this is like a good way to control like the color separately of that ocean. So if you wanted to add some nodes in here yourself that like maybe apply a gradient to the base color. That'd be fantastic. And also, I want to change some transparency on here, right? So if we up our transmission, now this doesn't work exactly the same way as our like transparency in something like Maya, you know, or sorry, our transmission in Maya, or at least I couldn't get it to work exactly the same way. Maybe it's a cycles thing. We could try switching over to cycles real quick. So I'm going to press space to pause. I just want to double check it real quick, because we're basically going to plug into our opacity, and we have to enable some stuff there. So so let's see where we at. Here we go. And yeah, I'm not seeing it, but let's switch over to cycles, and let's go over to rendered view, so we can kind of see it from a more standard render. And there we go. And I could say I'd say that we could use a little bit more noise on this, on either this little fall off here. Yeah, I like that. I like a little bit more noise there. And let's also plug into our alpha channel here. So notice as I plug in there, or reduce that, we can see more of that island underneath the surface there. So it's going to give a nice effect, and we can change our transmission amount, and transmission should affect and color the light that passes through it. But our opacity is going to let us see through to the underside of that, and we can also change if it's too dense. You can change your depth, your ocean depth shader, to be a little bit more. Let's get this a little bit more vibrant. Keep it a little bit more vibrant. You can change that ocean depth cube that we were using, and change the density on that to adjust the fall off there. You know. But yeah, so there you go. There's that. That's our first setup. Next up, notice that our roughness value, it's looking good. It's looking good for our ocean. However, it's kind of it's an even amount of roughness on our ocean foam, right? So I want you guys to think about the roughness individually. I would imagine that the roughness of the foam, I want that to pop out a little bit more. So if we take a factor like, if I like that base roughness right there, if I just assign that to a value, so let's do value, and let's put that there. If you want to be really nice and organized, you can always name your nodes and just call this like water roughness. There you go. And you can make that just straight up 0, right? So it's just not rough at all, and you get like a really nice sheen in there. If you want it to be like a little bit more stylized, maybe you add a little bit of roughness. But what we're going to do is pipe this into a vector math add, or just an add function, and we can plug in that color. It's just black and white, right? Like on this, because it's being sampled by that. And so now our foam is going to be rougher than the base water, okay? So then that foam, notice that like when we plug that in, that shine gets cut off by that foam. And if the foam, you want a little bit of like sheen to it, you can do a math multiply on that and then plug that into that factor there. So this little value is controlling how rough to make that foam as a result, because we're adding that on top of this base value. So you can change that base, and then you can change this to change the roughness there, right, to whatever you want. And I like how this is turning out pretty good. Maybe do a little bit less. I want like a little bit of shine on that foam. Just a little bit. See how it's highlighting that foam a little bit in there now? I like that a lot. So next up, let's talk about our waves. Actually, sorry, let's solve this little. I want a nice foam line when it hits that shore. Okay, so what we're gonna use, Shift A, ambient occlusion. Okay, this ambient occlusion, if you want to debug what it looks like, and I really recommend that you do, you can plug this in to that. It's going to slow down our render. And something that we want to do is, this is the best way that I found for cheating like that shoreline, is that you click inside, so it's detecting the bottom. See how it's all white out here, but it's starting to get a little bit of opacity there, right? If we plug this in to an invert, yeah, let's do that. And plug that in there. It should invert itself right there. Excuse me. What if I do this? Yeah, there you go. So now we have a nice fall off there. You see that? We have a beautiful sort of fall off. And if we increase our distance, now you get a nice edge to that shoreline. Okay. Now, if you don't like how intense that is, and we're gonna use the same idea. Like if you want it to be a more of a subtle fall off there, what we can do is, let's see, we can put it into a color ramp, of course, and then make that gradient a little bit more subtle. But we can also, let's see, plug this into a float curve and plug that into the color as a result. So you'll see nothing changes, but if we change the profile of this curve, when it re-evaluates, ooh, look at that, it's getting softer now. If we do that, it's gonna get real sharp there at the end. But I like something in between. Let's do like a little nice one there. So that's getting our coastline, okay? And I know what you're thinking. You're like, Mike, your foam's not in there. What are you doing, you fool? So what we need to do instead is, if you just keep in mind that you have a little color ramp right here, this is what is making the nice cutoff for that foam, right? If we take our add result and put it into another add, we could do the mix right here. And then I'm going to add the foam as that. And let's do another one factor right there. And if we plug that into our color ramp, and then plug that into our output color, it's going to start cutting it off with that stylized ramp in addition to the basic noise. So that's going to be fantastic for us if we want to tone this down to make it a little bit more on the extreme side right there. So now it's clamping in there, right? So that's how I'm going to fake the foam towards the coastline, and that's working great. I'm loving that. We can always, I want to make this a little bit lighter, a little bit more vibrant. You know what I'm saying? So it's really, yeah, get a nice like almost like a blue with a lot of warmth in it, you know. So next up, let's get the waves going. Okay, so the waves, I'm gonna switch back to Eevee because it's gonna take some working with them. And so I switch to Eevee right here, and I'm gonna use this color to to really examine our noise here. And let's also take that base color and let's turn that down. I want this to be darker. Why is it so bright out here? Interesting. Let's mess around with some other parameters. Oh, it's because it's now it's just using color there. Okay, cool. So we're gonna use this, okay? And let's talk about how we're gonna make these waves, right? I'm gonna fake these because we have currently this island just sitting in the middle, right? The island is sitting in the middle, and we want a distance field around here, okay? We want a distance field, and we're gonna take a distance calculation from world 0. So make sure your island's at world 0, or if you move your island really far away, you want this distance to be, you know, whatever the center of that island is. And we're basically gonna make a nice fall off with that, right? So take your geometry, your position of it, and it's going to be, I know what I said doesn't make much sense yet, but once I plug it in here, vector math distance, okay? So distance from 0. So let's plug that into our color. And it doesn't look like much yet. Let's hide our island, our base island. Let's see, where is it? Where is that bad boy? There we go. So you see this faint little fall off there. You see that? That is our distance, okay? Because this is world 0, and as it gets closer to 0, it's going to get more black, right? Because it's measuring the distance from that point. So the closer you are to that point, it's going to be like, if you're right on top of that point, it's going to be dead 0. If you're really far away, this is going to be like, what, you know, like 20 meters away. So if you're plugging 20 into that color, it's going to be blindingly white, you know. So what we need to do is affect that position data again, similar to how we're doing this, you know, on the add. And I'm just going to change this to be the range, and let's plug that into this, and let's do like a multiply. So if you have like a 1-1 position there, you know, let's get like a tiny, I'm going to do Shift A value, and let's do 1 just so you can see what it looks like. There we go. We're plugging that into that distance calculation. And currently it's just 1 because we're multiplying by 1. Any number times itself is still itself. But if I change this, ooh, look at that. Look at how that's changing, y'all. See how it's getting darker, and we're changing that radius of it. So if we do like 0.05, ooh, that's looking good. With 0.02, ooh, we're getting nice and opaque in there, okay? Getting nice and opaque. So what we can do with that is invert it, right? So I'm going to take that take that color and invert it, right? There we go. And let's make this white. So we're going to invert that and plug that into color. And boom, once it figures that out, you get that really nice fall off. Now you might be like, why is that so weirdly harsh and like hued? You know, it's because this is basically going into negative values, right? So it's going, if you plug a negative value into emission, you get some bad results. We don't want that. So to prevent that, do one of these. If you plug this into a clamp, it's going to really clamp out that value between 0 and 1. So you don't get extremely white values, you don't get extremely dark values, you know, like ones that are like negative and you can't see, because it just doesn't make much sense to plug that into emission, you know. So then it's gonna be nice, and boom, there you go. Just nice and simple there. So you can adjust the distance fall off here. So if you wanted to do 0.01, boom, it'll be a nice even sort of gradient across there. It's like a radial gradient from the origin point. It's really easy to see from above. Okay, so perfect. Next up, we're gonna take that result. That's our like base gradient, and this is when we start activating some of the math. So something that is great for this is sine waves. All right, so let's look at a sine wave. Basically, think of this angle, right, that it's processing right there. It's using that angle and is calculating out a value between, if you look at this middle line right here, this is 0, this is 1, and this is -1. So if we take a value and do the sine math on it, it's going to return this curve right here. Okay, and are you thinking what I'm thinking? That looks a lot like a wave, right? So if we take that, if we take a value that's ascending, you know, plug it in there, we're going to get a nice little wave profile out of it. So if we take this distance, right, if we take this distance and plug that into sine, let's clamp, I don't want to clamp the sine itself because I want that -1 range. Like if we clamp it, it's just gonna boom stay at 0, and then it's gonna continue up. So you're gonna get a weird like jagged fall off there, I think. So let's instead take that value. Well, first of all, let's just plug that into color, just so you can see what's going on, because it's doing a sine on that input, and it looks like nothing's happening, right? What we have to do, because this isn't going high enough in our values, because we've clamped that as well, we got to multiply this. So multiply, and then Shift A. Let's give it a value. There we go. And that value is our wave amount. Okay, we're going to multiply that gradient by wave amount, and just so you can see what we're doing here. Boom. So it's getting more and more powerful there. You see that? It's multiplying it by that to make it more powerful. And we can get really high values in here. And don't clamp this output, otherwise it's going to not be usable for that sine. But let's plug that into our value. And let's plug this into our color. And you'll see something nice happen. Boom, look at that. Look at that, right? So you can control how many waves you want. That's way too many. Just find a value that suits you, and you might be tempted like, oh, this is how I can make it crashing on the shore, you know? Don't do it that way. Instead, we're going to first add onto this value, okay? We're gonna add to this value, and that's gonna make it them scroll, so you're not gonna change this value when during the render. It's not going to be driven by like a frame or anything. Instead, we're going to add some nodes in between this to do that. And there we go. So I'm liking that, but see how we're getting into negative values in there? That's no good. Instead, we want to grab this and let's do a remap. I believe that's what it's called. Oh, let's see. I could have sworn it was remap. Map range, that's what it is. There you go. So map range, if you do from -1, because remember our sine wave outputs in -1 values and +1 values. So you remap it from -1 to be 0 as the baseline. Now you're going to get rid of that weird emission problem. Boom, there you go. There you go. And you'll notice that this out here is getting colored as well. And like, you're probably not going to like that, right? So what you're going to want to do, because we had back here, sorry, it's getting a little bit hard to observe, but that's fine. Back here, you had that gradient, right? So if you want to multiply this by that gradient, then you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to have your waves, and then they're going to dissipate as they go away from that zero distance. You see that? Look at that. Now you're going to get some nice waves in there, dude. Heck yeah. So if we change the amount, look at that. You get that nice fall off. And then we should adjust the profile of those at some point. But I want this to be animating, so you can control the speed of that, okay? So since that's multiplying by that nice ramp, what we can do is split this off. Let's move it down a little bit just for clarity. Let's do a vector math. I'm going to, I'm looking for add. That's mix. I just want the pure math side of it. So let's do math, and then let's do shift A, value, value in here, and then I can do hashtag frame. I'll just do frame for now, and then let's plug that into that value. So every frame we're adding this value to that gradient, right? And that's gonna, as that value goes up, we're multiplying it to get the waves amount, but that base add is plugging into that sine function, okay? So now those waves are going to start moving, right? Now this value is getting like a little bit incorrect, so let's do, can we do, let me delete the driver, and let's do hashtag, can I do a negative frame? That'd be cool. Let's do hashtag negative frame. There we go. So now they're going inward towards the ocean line, okay? So that's the idea there. And of course you can multiply that with another value that's like less, like point, like you could even do times negative frame or hashtag negative frame times 0.5 if you wanted to go like half as fast. But yeah, so that we can plug that in there. And we're getting some nice waves right there. Everything's looking nice for us. And let's turn back on that. Let's turn back on that cone so you can see. Right, where's that cone? Ah, there we go. So you can see, see how it's a little bit offset there. So if we want to shift this around, you can just by changing that distance node. So it's calculating from a different distance origin point. And I like that, pretty good. So there we go. So that's how we're going to be doing that. And then let's add our foam to that, okay? Let's add our foam to that. So I'm going to do, wait, sorry, this is multiplying with that nice gradient. We love that. And this is what is calculating out our foam, initial foam noise. And what we can do is the same thing that we did here. So we're just going to keep adding noise on here. And plugging that in there. Very cool. Let's plug that into this. And then let's use that ramp and plug that into the emission. Boom. Oh, dear Lord. Oh, dear Lord. So I forgot that like I'm using the ambient occlusion in here. So we need to switch back to cycles in order for it to be proper. And look at that. So it's getting real noisy in there. So one, you can reduce the size of your Voronoi texture. Right? You can change the size of that. Ooh. That's looking nice and stylized there. And then also this gradient, it's too even, right? So I want to take that before I plug it into our little foam ramp. I want to take that and let's do a curve on there. Float curve. Let's make that sharp. Boom. There we go. So now it's going to be a sharper fall off there. And we can control now those peaks, right? If we leave it at that default, it's going to look very similar to how it was before. But if we do something like this and then move this little end point right there, we can get a nice nice ring fall off at a certain point. Excuse me, let's do something like this. And we might want to change some of our noise so it's not as sharp. And we could also change like the initial divide. Like we could do this 0.005, so it's like wider. It starts wider right there. Let's change this a little bit. Sorry, this is why I like using Eevee for a while, because like it's easier to visualize on the fly. So let's do 0.1. There we go. And then let's change this to be not as severe right there. And we can also change the amount of waves. It definitely helps to label these as you're going, like this. Like I would label this as like wave speed, you know. And wave amount, let's up that. There you go. So you see that you can get a nice amount of waves going at the same time. You could even, before you plug this in, because you probably don't want completely ring waves, you can plug that into another noise texture and render it out that way. Also, just so you guys know, I'm using the GPU. To enable that, you want to go to your preferences, go to system, go to, if you have a graphics card that can use optics, go for it. Mine is too old. I got a little old boy there, so he's doing his best. But yeah, so that's going to be great for us. And next up, so we haven't talked about it yet, but let's use some displacement now, because these waves aren't going up and down yet. They're not going up and down. It's just foam that's kind of moving in. But if you were paying close attention, you'll know that these profiles right here, we can plug into that for displacement, right? So if we type in displacement and do height, we have object space displacement. Change that mid-level, because we have that noise being 0 to 1. Change the mid-level to 0, and then you can scale it up or scale it down depending on like what you want to do. And this displacement, let's plug it into that output. Sorry, it's really hard to see with this spread out graph. Plug it into that displacement right there. And whoop, there we go. Boom. And you'll notice nothing happens, right? So I believe what's preventing that is in our options, displace, bump only. You can do displacement and bump, and boom, you see that? See how that the ocean just rose up a little bit right there? Let's raise our scale to be even more exaggerated so you can really see it. Boom, look at that. So now you're getting those waves in there from that foam. And I feel like the foam fall off is a little bit too severe. I want like a nice smaller ridge of foam. So you're going to be a foam connoisseur after this. So let's do something like that. Yeah, that's looking good. And then something that I want in here is let's plug that into another curve, right? So float curve. And let's plug that into the height, because I want to change the profile. See, like the current wave is just, it's like a sine wave straight up. If you look at the profile of that, it is literally a sine wave right there, right? So we want to sharpen those valleys. We want to sharpen the peaks and then widen those valleys. So I'm going to use this float curve to sample that. And as I modify that, look at what happens to my wave shape there. It's going to get sharper. It's going to get sharper. And then if you want to get it pointier, go for it. You can also add additional nodes on here, little Bezier control points. to get the perfect like ocean wave that you want. So there we go. And you can plug that into your displacement there and get whatever sort of value you want, right? So so definitely spend some time and get the results that you want. Again, the blend that I'm including will have the shape of wave that I'm using. Also, let's downgrade this scale a little bit so it's not as severe. We kind of want it to show up a bit more though. So there we go. So next up, let's get this foam to be a little bit more detailed. Okay. So we have some waves, and we could also just plug this into a math variable and like do a multiply. There we go. So now you have a nice little parameter to control that before it plugs in. You can, make it more extreme or whatever in there, and just control that fall off. There we go. And then this one's looking like really sharp and stuff, but these ones aren't. So you probably need to change your ocean scale and the radius of those waves, like the wave amount, and then wave fall off radius, like lower this even more. Because like if I do like 0.0, that was 0.005, 0.003. So see that these waves get more powerful, So yeah, and then wave amount. Let's up that. I think I was using like 140 in my one that I was liking, So yeah, that's the secret there. There we go. And then these we can get to be nice and sharp. And yeah, and then the ambient occlusion will take care of any like shore contacts and stuff. So now we need to get that foam a bit more detailed. Sorry about that little detour there. I just wanted to show how to control it a little bit more. Your foam detail, I want to displace that foam up a little bit, okay? And this is gonna slow down the process a little bit because we're gonna need to subdivide this surface, okay? But if we take this foam, right? This is what that current ramp right there. Oh, sorry. Let's move these over. This is our roughness calculation only. So let's just kind of group those together. You can also add frames to stuff. So if you do this, I believe it's like J or something. Yeah, Control J. You can just frame these new things, and then let's go to Node and just call this like roughness calc. There you go. Just so it's a little bit more clear. The source file has some of those labeled. But yeah, so this color ramp right here has our fall off for that noise, right? It's like 1 right here wherever you see white, and it's 0 where you see the blue poking through. So if we use that as a mask for some noise on our displacement, we can get some nice looking noise in our scene. So I'm going to take another geometry node. Like remember our last geometry node's like way back here. I'm going to take another geometry node. And let's do geometry right here. And I'm going to take that same position and I'm going to plug that into a noise. Right? So noise texture right here. You have a few different options for like, you have like white noise, you have Voronoi noise. I'm going to just do regular noise. This is Perlin noise. Okay. Perlin noise is like a very soft sort of noise. Let's take oh, I didn't have music playing this whole time. Tragedy. Perlin noise. And check out what Perlin noise looks like. See that? So I think that's going to be looking good for a soft little fall off in there for like some like softer looking foam. Okay. So if you want to take if you want to see what that looks like, you can take that noise texture in there And let's go into our displacement and just replace that height basically. So look at that. So see how choppy it is everywhere? Now what we want to do is multiply this. I'm going to multiply by the little ramp right there. It's basically using this as a mask, right? Because this is just like basically 1 for pure foam and then 0 for the actual water. So now when we plug that in, it should give us something that's a little bit more controlled in certain places. So see how it's pushing up on the foamy areas and not at all anywhere else. So what we can do to make it not push up as much, actually first, no, I want to show you this. This is going to slow it down a little bit, but if we add another modifier, let's do generate subdivision surface. In our render, we can up the amount of subdivisions. I don't know if this calculates the viewport differently, but we can up the amount of subdivisions on that plane. There we go. So now we get like a little bit of an edge to that foam. Okay, now the foam is like way too intense, right? So what we want to do is change this value. Let's multiply it by another value, Shift A value. I'm just going to type that in. And then this is going to be foam strength or foam height mult. So let's do that. Let's do like 0.2 because this is like pretty intense. And let's just plug that in there and then plug that into our height. Okay. So now let's wait for it to render out. Notice that it's taking a lot longer. That's how tough that subdivision is, you know, to calculate. And there you go. Look at that. You see that? So now it's raising that foam up a little bit, and then you can see it has a little bit of a ripply nature to it. That's that purlin noise poking through, you know. So you can change the scale of that here however you like. To get a nice little foam on there. And then, right, so that we've plugged in our foam right there, and then our ocean waves. Let's just do a little vector math. Let's just add these two together and then plug it in. And you'll see that we have the best of all the worlds. We have our waves, we have our foam, we have it all, you know. So I'm just waiting for it to render out there. So there you go. So that's how you control it. That's all the parameters, and I hope you learned a good amount about some VFX, how you can use sine waves to create like ripples and stuff. If you wanted these to be non-linear, I would probably multiply that initial, this little output ramp. I would just get another geometry node in there, you know, plug this into like a Voronoi, and then multiply it by like a big Voronoi noise. So it's not just the same density overall. I'd probably adjust the density, like the scale of this noise, to make it not as finely detailed, you know. And then you get a nice mixture of like stylized rendering plus this nice foam in there, you know. If you wanted to further stylize this, I'd recommend, because you can do some cool work on the end right here, where you can use stuff like, let's just do Shift A shader. So you can do a mix shader. So if you pipe all of this roughness and stuff into a color ramp and plug that into one shader right there, and then mix it with a factor, you can use almost like a one shader for the foam by like putting your color ramp in here into the factor there, and so it'll be like using like part of that shader. Like you could use this nice roughness, but if you wanted to do like a tune shader for the foam, you could plug that into the other one right there, and then plug that into the factor, and then plug that into your output shader, right? And then there's some better BSDFs. So let's just do Shift A. If you go to shaders, like they have Toon BSDF, they have like a glossy, BSDF. So it'll be more about the specularity. And so you can isolate certain parts of that and plug it into the mix shader. But I really liked how this one turned out. So, so yeah, I'd recommend something like that. And you can always play around with your curves and stuff. But yeah, I hope you learned a lot. And that's how you use this sort of setup. I would expand my ocean to be wider for like a final render, But yeah, that's it. That's it, y'all. Thanks for watching.